Welcome back to the Armchair Attorney Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Leffler, real-life lawyer and adjunct professor of law at Michigan State University College of Law. Go Green. I know why you're here. I know why I'm here. I'm trying to find out, is it time? Should I be panicking? Should all of us be panicking? Maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. I, unfortunately, don't have the answer for you, but I have some great guests that I do think will add some level of clarity to everything we see going on right now. We had tariffs. We still have tariffs. We have global conflict. We've kind of always had global conflict. Maybe this is a little bit different. But what we do know is that every single day, millions of men and women are safely delivering freight on time and undamaged. And this is your story, the story of diesel, the story of conflict, the story of transportation and logistics. And I could not be more excited to have my very good dear friend, Ken Adamo, General Manager of Shippers for DAT Dial a Truck, also the Chief of Analytics. He loves a little bit of data, loves some analytics, and Ken will be here shortly. And of course, my colleague, my esteemed colleague, Professor or Dr. Jason Miller, endowed professor at the Eli Broad College of Business. As of course, I am but a simple adjunct. It is nice to always share time with these brilliant men as we navigate the supply chain, which continues to be something that is dynamic. So without further ado, allow me to introduce you to my good friend, Ken and Jason. Gentlemen, how are you?
Howdy.
Yep, doing well.
So let's kick it off with something that we saw just a little under a month ago, 3 weeks in. This is a video, which for the folks listening to the podcast, this makes absolutely no sense. I will describe it to an extent, but what we see here is the Strait of Hormuz we'll start from the very beginning. We see a bunch of ships going through this very narrow strait. And I believe about 20% of the globe's energy and liquefied natural gas comes through this strait. And you can see as time goes on, as we get into early March, ships stop moving. So I want to turn to you, Professor Miller, to you, Jason. What in the world is happening and what should we think about it?
I mean, we're experiencing the largest negative supply shock in the energy sector that we've ever experienced. And it's been going on now for, roughly 23-ish, 24-ish days, accounting for those first couple of days. You still had some vessel transits. Right now, I've got the Dallas Fed Energy Survey for this quarter up. It just came out this morning, and I think the energy executives put it best. It's just pure uncertainty right now. We don't know where this is headed. I mean, obviously, energy prices have went up. There's an incredible disconnect between the sort of financial side of this captured by the futures markets, where crude's at 90 to 100 a barrel, versus the physical delivery market, where we're seeing Asian refiners pay up to 170 a barrel right now for physical delivery. And so right now it's uncertainty because we just don't know where this is going to be headed, but the next 2 weeks are going to be absolutely critical.
Turning to you, Ken, why should we care about what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz? I mean, sure, there's a lot of stuff on the other side of the globe, but how does that impact domestic transportation?
I mean, this may come as a shock to many of your listeners, but the vast majority of trucks run on diesel.
Wait, say that again?
The vast majority of trucks run on diesel.
Seriously?
Yeah, we haven't, the Cyber truck, whatever they call it, the Cyber Semi hasn't replaced all of our ICE internal combustion engine. And everyone can calm down. We're not talking about immigration and customs enforcement here. They're still ICE engines. And again, it may come as a shock, but diesel is refined from crude oil. So it is a meaningful part of a carrier's P&L, profit and loss statement. It's a large expense for them. It is a large budget line item for shippers, of course. And for brokers, they get the fun of having all of the exposure and none of the definition, right? Because most brokered loads are handled all in. So it is throwing a bit of a monkey wrench into our operations across all three core segments in the market.
But the transportation industry, I mean, the volumes remain somewhat consistent, but do you see a demand increasing for capacity? Are we seeing a crunch on the transportation side, or is there plenty of capacity out there at the moment?
I think there's plenty of capacity, right? I think like that that would be mischaracterizing it. I think like over the longer time, we've normalized from. I think I posted this a few weeks ago. Total macro capacity, and it's impossible to measure. It's like measuring how many marbles are in a jar from 100 yards away. Like from the best that we can summarize, there's probably we're back to the pre-COVID growth rate in terms of total macro truckload for higher capacity, and certainly at the margins, right? The enforcement around non-domiciled ICE at weigh scales, and I think to the least extent, but still worth mentioning, is the English language proficiency stuff is kind of chopping some of the short-term capacity out of the market.
So we have the federal regulators coming in with some really interesting driver qualification issues, English language proficiency being one, non-domiciled. That final rule went into effect earlier this month. We'll see how that goes, if there's litigation around it. And you still have this new phenomenon. I'm going to turn to you, Jason. So you put this up. This is a great chart about national diesel prices. Can you kind of describe the chart? Again, there are people who are listening to this, so we'll try to find a way to get you access to these things. But what is this chart about? What are we seeing on the side of the trucking industry as it looks at these diesel prices going up?
Yeah, so when you look at where the EIA has national diesel prices, last month, so February, you're like $3.80 to $3.90 a gallon. We're now at about $5.38 a gallon. So we've jumped up, what is that, about $1.60-ish a gallon, give or take. Over a very, very, very short period, we're up $1.80 a gallon from where we were a year ago. And these sudden increases, the only comparable increase was in 2022 in the spring after Russia invaded Ukraine. What was different then is freight volumes were still very, very, very strong in that first and early second quarter of 2022. That's actually peak total freight activity in the U.S. in history for moving by truck. Right now, volumes are in general flattish from where they were a year ago. Capacity has left, so payroll data is down about 3 to 3.5% at least on the dry van truckload side. And certain sectors of freight are doing well, and then certain sectors aren't doing well. And I think that's what characterizes this sort of tighter market cycle versus, let's say, a back half of 2017, most of 2018, where essentially every sector of trucking was really tight. Right now, flatbed's really tight, refrigerated somewhat tight, dry van somewhat tight, but there's a big difference between how tight it is in the flatbed space versus the more conventional equipment types.
Now, you see this giant spike. This is because so much of the hydrocarbons and the fuel that go in the global economy are kind of getting bottled up behind the Strait of Hormuz. So we see this jumping in price. Do you have any idea where it could go if that remains the case, where you can't get through that? Or what are we thinking about that looks like in the next couple of months if this thing is protracted?
Oh, if we're at the type of vessel capacity that we are today, 2 months from now, you're looking at $170 to $180 a barrel crude oil. And so that's going to put diesel at $8 a gallon nationally. Now that is recession inducing at that point. But we've seen Saudi Aramco come out and say, look, we think if this continues for another month, so through all of April, we're looking at $180 a barrel oil. United Airlines put out a memo where they're planning for $175 a barrel oil at peak, and oil being at $100 a barrel for the remainder of not only this year, but through most of 2027.
That United piece is fascinating because that was not directed to shareholders. That was directed to the employees. Like, hey, everybody, this is what we're expecting. This is what we're planning for. So if they're planning, do you think that's the pathway this goes? Or do you see a path where this thing, this excursion, we'll say, kind of comes away?
So I think what's really important to recognize is there's a huge disconnect right now between, I'm going to call it the financial oil market, that's your futures market where you've got a lot of speculators, hedge funds, et cetera, versus the physical market where you're actually taking delivery on, let's say, a spot basis. Right now, we're seeing refiners in East Asia are paying $140, $150, up to $170 a barrel to get crude oil. You have concerns about aviation fuel being rationed in the Philippines. South Korea has become part of the conversation. China is banning exports of refined products at this point in time. And so it is certainly possible that at some point, if this continues, that the financial side of this, the futures market, has to catch up to where the physical market is, because the physical market is essentially saying there's a lot more tightness here than what we're seeing the futures markets say.
Well, it kind of we talked about this before we went live, but like I have 4 kids. You know, I grew up I'm 41 now, so I grew up during the Afghanistan conflict, and I grew up during the Iraqi conflict. And I always felt like every generation deserves a long, protracted battle in the Middle East. So, I mean, I think you guys are all fathers. So, Ken, this has got to be encouraging for you that at least your kids get a chance to experience what we all got to watch unfold in real time 20 some odd years ago.
It's sort of amazing, right, how the modern theater is changing, though, right? From, boots on the ground to hearing about it on the radio. We were chatting before we went live about hearing it on the radio versus like actual drone footage, through the Ukraine, and now the, scenes from Tel Aviv and throughout the Middle East. So, yeah, it's always interesting. I always liked the archaeological record of gas stations that went out of business and where they were stuck at with their fuel prices, right? Like there's one down the road I know that's been out for over a decade, and it's at $4 a gallon, and now we're kind of back there. There's other ones that are at $1.79. So certainly wild times on the fuel side of things.
Well, you put out this chart. I want to share it here. And again, for the folks that are listening who can't see this, what is this chart? What are we understanding from this national spot dry van rates? What are we seeing here?
Yeah, so most spot rates for those in the industry are negotiated what we would call all in. In other words, where when you enter into an agreement with the shipper, you typically agree on the line haul price or the price for the actual transportation. And then you have a fuel surcharge and then other accessorials. So depending on where fuel goes, you automatically get compensated up or down, depending on kind of a formula. So it's usually a baseline number, which is $1.25 is a pretty common one. And then an efficiency. So 6.5 to 6 miles per gallon are 2 fairly common ones there. On the spot side, that is not the case. So you're just negotiating $1,500. And out of that, if you're a carrier, you've got to pay for the transportation, you've got to pay for fuel, you got to pay for insurance and all these other different things. So what this shows is, whereas all-in rates have been holding pretty steady at the time of this chart anyway, it was about 5 days ago, what we would call like the allocation towards line haul has been shrinking because rates hadn't been moving up much at all. Fuel prices were, so a higher percentage of the carriers' expenses were going to fuel, and less were left over to pay for the truck, to pay for salary, to pay for insurance, to pay for all of those things. So that's kind of, I think, what this exemplifies. I call it a little bit of a mirage, right? It's empty calories. It's a sweet tooth where rates go up on an all-in basis, and you think that's great, but it's actually going up because fuel has gone up, and unfortunately, it's not going up by the same amount you would need to make yourself whole. If it was, both of these lines would be going up in concert.
Do you think shippers understand the dynamics of the fuel issue that's facing the smaller motor carriers? Because I imagine for bigger motor carriers, they negotiate surcharges and they're probably to an extent protected or insulated from this. But maybe I'm wrong. What either one of you guys, what would be like for a big motor carrier? Is this a big issue for them to worry about, or do they have contracts built in to deal with this type of variability?
I mean, if you're a large carrier hauling mostly contract freight, you're going to have a surcharge attached to it. But the question then turns into how efficient are you running? So as Ken mentioned, let's say you're assuming 6.5 miles a gallon. If you're only getting 6 miles a gallon right now, this is really hurting. Or if you're having to deadhead more, this is really hurting. So we're going to see carriers be very selective about the freight that they are going to move. I may not go into Southern Florida if I think I'm not going to get a backhaul out of there, and I'm going to have a much higher deadhead cost than before. But if you're getting 8 miles a gallon, hey, this is great right now. I mean, the LTL carriers, they're going to be making extra profit this month and very likely the next coming months off of higher fuel surcharges. So it really depends where you reside. But if you are a inefficient spot market centric carrier, this is the worst thing that possibly could have happened for you.
Do we think that there's going to be more exits in the business, Ken? Like we see every month, 6,000 or 7,000 motor carriers, become authorized to haul in the industry. Is there going to be another culling that we're expecting? Or is it, if you've been able to hang on, just keep hanging on, it's going to be okay soon?
So it depends. To echo what Jason said, so if 80%, just for easy math, 80% of freight that moved is contract, I would say 80% plus of that is actually those carriers are making money on their fuel surcharge. They're running at an efficiency rate higher than a fuel surcharge that may have been printed a decade ago, right? If you're running at 8 miles per gallon and your fuel surcharge with your carriers, your shippers at 6.5, you're doing okay right now. Like you're making money on fuel. On the small carrier side, I think it all just depends on where like the fundamentals go. Like I think in flatbed, probably not. Like maybe it slows down some of your margin expansion and the tailwind that you were seeing, but it seems like the demand's going to be strong enough there to outweigh the effect. I think in reefer with some of the crop damage and, if we have a poor produce season, I think it could, push more trucks out. A flatbed is to me the most certain. Reefer, I think, is pretty well established what's going to happen. Honestly, maybe especially amongst this panel, I have the most unknowns about dry van. I really don't. I don't know. I remain optimistic about the year. I remain cautiously optimistic about how demand is going to hold up once we get into the spring shipping season. But I also am terrified of $5 plus diesel through the summer. I think those things will be at odds with each other, and it's tension that the system just doesn't need.
Would you echo those sentiments, Jason? What do you think for the couple of months going into the summer? How is this going to look for the motor carriers?
Yeah, I think Ken's different sector summary is spot on. Flatbed looks very strong right now. Data center construction is very robust.
We love the data centers. We love the data centers.
That is just the big thing, and it's a physical ecosystem. It's the solar panels to put in solar fields. It's the construction equipment. All of this stuff is doing very well right now. On the dry van side, furniture is doing terrible because people aren't moving. Carpet's doing terrible because people aren't moving. Appliances are doing terrible because people aren't moving. I mean, we've seen production falling back to levels in 2012, 2013 in some of these sectors. There's a lot of concerns about motor vehicles right now in terms of where the consumer is going to be at in terms of purchasing power. Paper's doing abysmal, still one of the biggest freight generating sectors out there. So what you see is kind of the data center ecosystem and the freight that supports that. That's going to keep going strong this year. I mean, it doesn't seem that we're going to be close to an AI bubble yet. And given a lot of these projects are already in the pipeline, it really isn't going to matter quite as much, certainly over the next 3 to 5, 6 months. On the consumer side, the U.S. consumer is not doing the best at the moment. And the concern is $4 a gallon gas, that hurts. If we go up to $5, that really hurts. Again, the big concern is the catastrophic oil at $140 or $150 a barrel. Gas is now $6 a gallon nationally. When we had this in 2022, we still had a lot of people that were doing okay because of the stimulus money that they had banked. We hadn't had the prolonged period of price increases. There was a lot more essentially slack in the consumer ecosystem to keep things going. You had credit card delinquencies had fallen to near record low levels. You don't have that this time around.
Yeah, that's a really important point on the American consumer. I mean, there's anecdotally, if you go to somebody and say, I need $400 in the next day or 2 days, most Americans couldn't do that. But on a practical side, the credit card delinquencies are up. The auto loan defaults and delinquencies are up. Mortgages and rental payments, those are also falling behind. So there's a lot less capacity for the American consumer to buy things. And then you add in raising fuel prices, which will hit everything eventually. It doesn't bode well. Like it's the frog inside the pot. Ken, is the pot boiling or is the pot just a little bit warm? Is it still comfortable enough for us to enjoy?
I think the thing that I struggle counteracting the most is like this sense of like forced absolutism, right? Like, well,
I need bright lines, Ken.
One thing can't be true because all of these other things, all these other things can't be true because this one thing is true. So I do think like parts of the industrial economy around data centers and heavy manufacturing, and as we talked about, like steel and other things are up. But like people aren't building homes. And I think like there's a lot of things that are like very, very, very like nuanced and compounded in that home buying and home building and home remodeling and multifamily home building that are harbingers of like not great fundamentals within the economy. And I feel like we can't have that conversation without thinking like, well, you're a bear. Like if you think that, then like you're not interested in making America great again, right? Like we can't.
No, of course
you can't point out these things, but like yeah, I think there's certain sectors of the economy that are doing well. I mean, if you're retrofitting gas plants in the Northeast for crypto mining, like it is a great time. Like your view of the economy is milk and honey. Like it is the greatest time since the Industrial Revolution for you. Like there's electricians quitting their jobs left and right. And it's like the fracking boom was back in the day. They're retrofitting a lot of these energy plants to be on-site crypto mines and data centers. The AI boom, right? Like all of these things can be great, but also like, I don't know, general contractors feed a lot of families. They're your kids' baseball coaches, and they're hurting really, really bad. People aren't putting that new deck on the back of the house right now.
We did all the projects during COVID. We don't have the resources to do them now. Everyone bought their furniture and they bought their appliances. So now it's kind of a wait and see thing. If we're like, one of the things I really like talking before we went online, I'm going to go back to that, is when we got the buildup for the Iraq war. I mean, we saw a lot of material. We saw arguments before the UN. We saw people going across the globe building this coalition. This was different. This was something where it seems like the allies weren't necessarily aware of it. And once it happened, there's no way to stop it. I just love to get your guys' thoughts, like having seen this, we've seen this show before. It's a totally different place, but how are you feeling about this conflict right now, Jason? Like you're watching this unfold. Is it an unforced error by the administration, or is there a better strategy that we're going to see materialize over the course of the next few months?
So it's still too early to call right now. It ultimately just depends. Iran has showed much more staying power than I think could be expected. There's no one who's going to say with a straight face that anybody in the administration thought that we would still be having open conflict on March 25th. There's not one person who's going to tell me that, and with a straight face, that I would believe. The concern right now, I think, is we have a chance at this moment in time for an off-ramp that gets us out of too much extremely long-term damage. We've seen this. Qatar has lost 17% of their natural gas export production for the next 3 to 5 years.
That's insane. Insane.
Yeah, thanks to just a couple Iranian missiles hitting their facility. The concern I have is if we don't take the off-ramp now, we are looking at boots on the ground. You don't send the 82nd Airborne and you don't have 5,000 Marines heading over there for no reason. That's the point where we start looking at incredible infrastructure damage taking place. That turns it into, okay, oil at 150 a barrel for the next 3 years type of situation. If you have incredible facility destruction that takes place, that's what we don't want to see. And so I think if we end up walking away from this situation with basically the 2015 Obama-Iran agreement, which seems to be actually with that 15-point plan looks an awful lot alike, I think people are going to say, what was this for? But then the question is can you get more than that without risking, very, very, very serious global economic damage? That's where we don't know. I think the American public, though, again, we all grew up in this. We're all roughly the same age here. We at least got to see the debate play out. And it was extensive for those who are younger listening. It was extensive for the second Iraq war. We had debates in Congress. Folks had to vote on it. It cost Hillary Clinton the 2008 Democratic nomination, arguably, against would have been at the time Senator Obama. Because she had been for the war and our view on the war had soured so much. I don't think there's ever been a conflict, though, where the American people have been more angry so quick about a conflict. Because when you look first month or so after our invasion of Iraq, I think it was like 75, 80% approval. We're now at 40% for something like this. So, I mean, that's the challenge. I don't see how the American public tolerates another month. And unfortunately, the Iranians know that.
I feel like we're kind of in this period of stasis. Like everyone's kind of waiting to see what happens as it continues to advance. And we see things in the news. Oh, we're talking about winding down. Oh, we think there's going to be some conversations that'll result in something. We've been told explicitly no boots on the ground, but then there's talk of mobilizing Marines. It's interesting to see this unfolding, and I can't help but feel like the old days back in the early 2000s, we watched the Iraqi conflict go. And there was a lot more folks around that side to help push this. Ken, when you're seeing this, I will say we are experiencing issues on LinkedIn. It seems to be on that side. So this recording, we'll re-release it, but I'm getting notes that it's not working on that platform. So I apologize for that. We'll get this all cleaned up in post, as they say. But Ken, looking at this thing as it unfolds, will this have a bigger impact than the Ukrainian conflict that started, not terribly long ago? Is this one that's going to be far more reaching than we anticipate at this moment?
I don't know. I'm not like a foreign policy expert. I think like, above all, right, I think we're Americans. And if you're going to trust the administration on their word that, and again, it's now being widely corroborated that Iran seemingly was getting closer to having nuclear capabilities, then I think I talk about freight. So like if the government did what they felt they needed to do to stop that, whether that was in collaboration with our allies or not, it feels like that mission is progressing as planned. I would also tell you that I don't think it'd be beyond the pale for this administration to block the export of oil to solve this problem domestically. I think, Jason, you're an expert on this, and I can't confirm this, but it is constitutional to tariff exports, correct? They would have to just flat out block the exportation of oil.
They would need to. So this is the thing. IEEPA would actually probably allow that.
This is the IEEPA use case.
Because the IEEPA didn't say you can't tariff, but and exports are unique though. You can't tariff exports. So that is in the Constitution. The challenge is that one, so much of our issue with the export side and the refined product piece is, again, it's that finding the right balance situation that you would need to have on that. And that would crush one of our biggest export categories other than aircraft, which, given where jet fuel prices would be, if we're talking this conversation, would probably not be in quite as much demand as they would have been. And I think that the challenge we're dealing with now is over the last decade, we've seen the intersection of geopolitics and supply chain management probably get, they're so much more entwined. I mean, I remember in 2021, right, we're having to figure out what is China doing with, regional lockdowns due to COVID, because that was cascading over to affecting ocean freight, and then shortages in U.S. manufacturing that was affecting inflation. And so I think that that's made it very, very challenging. But what we're seeing now is just an incredibly complex series of events playing out. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we're having is, it doesn't matter where on the political spectrum you are with this. You don't have to have a PhD to see that a lot of the behaviors being done by the administration are timed around the news cycle, and specifically whether the oil market is trading or not. You see an announcement Monday morning when the market's down. You saw some people almost assuredly trading on that too, based on all the reporting. So you extend a timeline till Friday night or Saturday when the oil market's closed. And so I think that that's been one of the challenges is I think we're all trying to have in the freight space. And this is, again, I'm just going to be like reading here from the Dallas, Dallas Fed Energy Survey, which if you're in freight, you should be reading that anyway. Global uncertainty, highest we've ever felt. We're hoping for a quick end of the war. Volatility is making it impossible to plan for everything. Uncertainty is off the charts. We have no clue where this will end. The Iran war is wreaking havoc on the industry. All of these different things, geopolitical factors roaring back. We need certainty. And that's what we feel we're lacking, is we don't have a sense of what is the end game for this. When will we know? Because right now the challenge is, how do we plan? How does anybody plan from a pricing standpoint? Because every plastic maker right now knows they're about to get wrecked because resin will be more expensive. But how do they go talk to food manufacturers and say, hey, we got to raise things 3-4%? They don't know what to do right now.
Did you see, Jason, the widely circulated memo from one of the top chemical manufacturers in the U.S. saying temporary price increases from 50 to 100%?
That would not surprise me. I haven't seen that one, but that seems actually like a reasonable figure.
I don't want to out who it was because of some, I don't say conflicts of interest, but just, I think if you kind of bring it back to freight, if you want to talk about should I panic, I would highly recommend if you two haven't watched it, I would recommend it to the audience. Go watch the 60-minute special about U.S. shipbuilding. That's when you should panic. It is. I sat slack-jawed at my television and I watched the entire thing again. I had no idea we are where we were with shipbuilding.
In terms of the fact that we don't manufacture ships?
We don't. They were comparing a Korean company had bought I think it was the Philly terminal, the Philly or the Baltimore terminal around shipbuilding, and they're trying to implement some practices, but basically they build 3 to 4 ships a year. In the Korean yard that this company also owns, they're putting out 12 a month.
Wow.
And they're talking about contracting overseas to build submarines and military vessels. So it's these critical infrastructure components, I think, also weigh heavy into a lot of these discussions. I don't know. I think it's going to be a fairly tumultuous time. It's a midterm year, as Jason said. There's going to be a lot of, a lot of back and forth in policy. But the market is poised to rebound. I think we can all agree that we have gotten to a point where the market needs to go somewhere, right? I mean, I don't think anyone's debating that. I think the first calls of the end of the freight recession started in November of 2024, right? So
it's always the back half of next year. Of next year.
It's like The Economist that calls for a recession every year, and then once a decade they're like a Nobel laureate because
should have been listening to him. Absolutely.
And so I think the market is poised to recover, and again around that forced absolutism. I think a lot of folks are just kind of trying to get their arms around what that shape of recovery looks like, because we've seen lackluster up cycles in the freight market before. We've seen crazy gangbusters. We've seen 3-minute miles, right, in the COVID years for trucking companies. So I think most people are in alignment that the market's poised to recover. Most people are in alignment that the rise in fuel prices is net bad for that recovery. And I think there's probably just a bunch of heated debate around will data center construction be enough to offset the weak general industrial economy? Will consumer spending hold up? Because a lot of that consumer spending drives. What about GLP? We haven't talked about GLP-1s and produce volumes, right? Everyone's getting skinny now. They're not Beval. If you're
health as a service, a subscription thing, it's great. It's beautiful.
This is such a tough industry to be absolutist about, because if you're a Beval shipper or a Beval beverage alcohol, these are the end times.
Yep.
I don't know if anyone's been tracking.
The industrial production data shows it too. The production of beverages in this country has plunged since 2023.
Yeah, it's because people aren't drinking. A lot of them are
especially
off it altogether, or they've switched to edibles. Right? It's it's wild. Yeah. So it's not the same experience for anyone, I think, across the economy. What about if you're a fuel hauler right now? You're having a pretty good time.
But I think this is the key thing, and this is again what differs in, let's say, 2021, especially all of 2021, or back half of 17 through, call it the first half or the first 3 quarters of 18. It was everything was doing well. It was everything was growing. You could literally just randomly throw darts. If somebody, and this shows how nerdy I am, if you put all the different industries that generate freight up on a wall, just randomly start throwing darts, you would have hit an industry that was growing with your eyes closed in the back half of 17, most of 2018, or in 2021. Now you have to aim, because again, I was just pulling up pending home sales, and this is the larger share of how people move. They're down right now, the index, and it's based off of, is down 40-ish% from 2019 levels, and it's just moving flat. And that's not even adjusting for population changes. And so like that, if you're hauling carpet right now, this is not great times, especially if you're hauling carpet that's more for remodeling work, or because people are moving. It's not good times. But if you're hauling massive storage batteries going to sites for where data centers are going to be built, hey, battery production, to pick your poison, is up either 2.5 to 4.5 times what it was before COVID. So we're building a lot more of those things. Most of the guts of them come from China, and being tariffed, but that's where the market's at. And so I think that's why we're getting such different reads on things, is because it's not universal. You have to say certain shipper verticals are doing well, and therefore those carriers are doing well. Other carriers aren't doing as well. Prior to this, the spot market really looked great for everybody. It's just been the fact that for and I'm going to use DATS data for this, both refrigerated and dry van, any increases we've seen March to February, they're way, way, way less than what the implied fuel surcharge increase is. So just as Ken's chart showed, your profitability is down substantially from where you were in February for those two equipment types.
How long do you think this lasts? So we know we have, like, it seems like, at least with the administration, it's not clear how soon this conflict can go on. But if we see energy prices continue to be at this level or higher in the next few months, like, what does that look like for going into the fall or to the back half of next year? Like, are we going to be dragging this weight behind us that's going to inhibit the ability of the economy to grow? Or will it ultimately be just a blip that we accommodate and move forward with? What do you think about that, Ken?
The latest Fed print, right? Growth on, if you were hoping for cuts, growth came in too hot, growth came in too hot and inflation came in too hot, and it kind of like counterbalanced each other out, right? Like, that's kind of the summary of the book that came out for the last meeting. There's still what the market's pricing in 2 cuts at least this year. I don't know. I don't see a world where if diesel prices stay this high or higher the balance of the year, that it's net good for any and everything. I think people cut their vacations, they cut their net spending. They are very fuel conscious when they're paying for just unleaded gasoline $4 plus in the Midwest per gallon, right? They're car buying. You tend to see downsizing from larger cars to smaller cars, or general like lack of buying cars in general. I don't know. I just don't think that's a good thing. But I also don't know that that's going to happen. I would be extremely surprised if we rolled into a midterm election with the average national diesel price of $5 a gallon.
Midterms will be interesting. What do you think about that, Jason? Do you think the political energy to slow this thing down is going to be able to win over the American population? Or do you think it'll just be rally around the flag, don't worry about what we're doing, just trust that we know what's the best option for the country?
Well, that isn't what's happening. I mean, when the war is already at only 40% approval based on the latest polls, there's absolutely no rally around the flag effect. The challenge is now is we are at a point. We've got about 2 weeks to really figure out what's going to go on here. Because if those 2 weeks we are still in this status quo of basically nothing moving through Hormuz, energy prices are just going to start going up, and they're going to start going up in a big way. Because what's going to have happened is the Saudis cannot use their pipeline capacity to get all of their oil to the West to export it. And so what's going to happen is they're going to have to start engaging in even more shut-ins. And once you start shutting in oil wells, a lot of it will come back fairly quickly, but some of it doesn't come back at all, or some of it takes several months to come back. And so what you can think of is each day that this is going on, that we're not having normal traffic through Hormuz, there is more oil wells in the Middle East being shut down, basically. And so that's going to prolong the higher oil prices. Oil's not going back. Brent was at 72 before this happened. You can forget about seeing Brent at 72. Like, that's not where the physical market's going to be at for the rest of this year. We've already done enough damage that when you see where Goldman has their predictions out, they're thinking steep come down, but oil's not going back to 72. The concern is there's a scenario where, again, we're looking at the 140, 150, 180 a barrel. That's at the point the economy falls into a recession.
What would that look like? What would be the first kind of indications that there's a recession coming as a result of the increasing fuel costs?
Terrible jobs numbers. So one of the challenges right now is that there's a very good chance our population is actually shrinking, which we've never dealt with before as a country. It's a bad thing for freight because fewer people means fewer amount of stuff that needs consumed. But if we start to see job growth, numbers that are, let's say, negative 100, we had negative 92,000 for last month seasonally adjusted. If we're consistently negative and we're talking negative 50,000 or more, that's a pretty good indicator that jobs are indeed being shed. So that would be probably the best higher frequency indicator. It'd be monthly to look at, where we would start to get a sense of this. Again, I think that this administration will do whatever it can to not have 140 or 150 a barrel oil, because there's a very clear midterm outcome result with 140 or 150 a barrel oil.
What are the levers the administration can pull to keep it beneath that? Ken mentioned maybe using IEEPA to ban export, but that would be insanity, I would imagine. Like, we're just going to stop exporting and then it'll all be fine.
The big thing is not escalating more with Iran in terms of ground troops. So that's really the only card that is left to play, is essentially how the military campaign gets waged. But herein is the problem from a strategic standpoint, is our enemies know this. The Iranians know this. And so if they know that the whole goal is not to have 140 or 150 a barrel oil, you can start to plan your strategy around that. You saw that decision again. Was it Friday night? You have the threat that in 48 hours, if traffic in Hormuz is not flowing freely, we're going to target your power plants. And the Iranians coming back on Sunday saying, that's fine, we're going to blow up the Gulf Coast nation's energy infrastructure. And we proved it with Qatar that we can do it. And you saw this behavior. And so that is the challenge, is geopolitically, we don't have as strong of a card as we'd like to play, because the concern about the energy infrastructure is clearly so paramount in shaping our strategic decision making.
What does the Iranian have mentioned, or at least suggested, that their goal is to see a $200 per barrel number? What does $200 per barrel of oil look like? What would that mean for transportation or just Americans more generally?
Ken, where would that put gas, or that put diesel? What, like at least $8, maybe $8.50 nationally at 200?
So much at that point goes into the retail wholesale spreads. Like, they could, you ask what the administration could do. They could temporarily nationalize or put rationing on non-commercial uses of diesel. The supply and demand levers exist. They're all just wild to think about. This is an insane conversation.
That's what I love about it.
But this is the challenge. At that point, if oil got that expensive, here's the thing: the economy is going to fall into a recession because the Fed's going to have to raise rates. The concern was the producer price index data for February was really, really, really troubling to begin with, and that was no energy shock. We know March's reading is going to be bad. We know at this point April's reading is not going to be great. The challenge is the Fed is going to have to start looking out, and the Fed meets again in June, I believe. I think there's an April meeting coming up. They're probably unlikely to do anything at that. But then that June meeting, if we're talking oil still at over 100 a barrel at that point, I'm guessing the Fed's going to probably raise interest rates. And you can imagine the reaction that will have happen. But that's their only course of option. So that's the other entity we have to consider here, is a Fed that is very clearly still independent. And so if oil stays where it's at right now, you're probably going to have an interest rate hike in June, because that's the only solution to try to get inflation under control.
And I don't see a world where we go back beneath $100 a barrel as we continue to see infrastructure around the Gulf get destroyed. Even if you were to clear the Strait of Hormuz today, there's so much back glut out there. It's going to take time to get out there. As we kind of get close to the wrapping up of this, I want to pivot to another place. We talked before we started recording, and I always love talking. I mean, this is not the best place to talk about nuclear proliferation, but I think it's a great time to have brilliant guys help me kind of think through this. The only country that I'm really aware of that had nuclear weapons, that voluntarily relinquished the nuclear weapons, was Ukraine. And when Ukraine did this after the fall of the Soviet Union, they had this treaty with both the Russians and with the Americans of territorial sovereignty. Like, you're not going to take my stuff, and I'll give you up the weapons of just mass destruction. And we saw what happened. You give up the nukes, you lose that ability to say, hey, you're not going to come knock on my door. And we look at Iran and we say a similar thing, that they were going to have the nuclear weapons. And if you look at clips over the last 40 years, they've been just weeks away, months away from having a nuclear weapon. And if I were a leader of a sovereign nation, I would say I would never, ever, ever relinquish nuclear capability, because this is what happens. So as we look at what's happening on the global perspective of nuclear proliferation, this has got to be something that people are really wringing their hands about. What are your thoughts about what we're seeing unfold, and what's the message we tell to the broader world about nuclear weapons and nuclear proliferation?
Yeah, so what I would say, there's actually one other country that voluntarily gave up nuclear weapons, and that was South Africa.
Oh, that's right.
But that was because the white government was transitioning over to a black government, and they did not want their own people to have nuclear weapons. And so that was the only whole program voluntarily disassembled. I mean, the reality is that India and Pakistan developed nuclear weapons in secret for a reason. The Israelis did it as well. The North Koreans did it as well. That is the lesson every leader is taking away from this. The other aspect of this that gets a little troubling is when you look at how the Europeans certainly view the U.S. as a very volatile nation at the moment, is you only have one country in NATO that is fully nuclear independent, and that is France. Do we see Germany have a conversation that, hey, maybe that needs to change for us? Because and the reason I say that France is the only country is because the UK's nuclear arsenal is all submarine based, but it's our system. So we have to maintain it, and therefore we sort of get usage rights on it.
I see. Okay.
But so any type of world where, developing nuclear weapons is where we want to see, is not what we want to see. I cannot fathom that Ukraine at some point is not going to seriously think about that decision again. This is the other thing with Iran. Ukraine has sent advisors over to help us. The Russians, I would be willing to bet, have sent advisors over to help the Iranians. And that is the other thing that we have to keep in mind in terms of the length of this. There's only one country on the planet that is really massively benefiting from this conflict, and it's the Russian Federation.
Yeah, the sanctions are gone from a lot of their petrol products. So if the stuff that was normally going to Western Europe, that can go back through Russia. I have to imagine the Chinese are probably pretty excited, or at least okay with this, in the sense that it keeps American hard military stuff out of the Taiwanese area. But I don't know. It's an interesting time.
I think China looks at this and says, wow, we've learned a tremendous amount from this. Because if you want to bet they're not understanding and studying U.S. tactics, they are. The concern with China is simply, will the West ever stand up to China if they basically say, okay, Taiwan, you have an option, become a part, or it's go time? Quite frankly, I don't think any of us will be there. I think we will all basically say, you know what? Not our problem, not our fight, not worth the damage. And that will be that. So I think that's a concern that Taiwan has, is if it sees that the U.S. basically signs an agreement fairly quickly because of concerns about economic pain. If you're the Taiwanese, you have to say, well, they're not gonna engage China on our behalf.
What are your thoughts on that, Ken?
I'm a freight guy. So I think what I've known my entire career is that for most folks in freight and logistics, especially the brokers and carriers that we argue with on LinkedIn and FreightX on a daily basis. Volatility is good. I think the only volatility that is bad is fuel volatility, unfortunately. So I think we're a little bit of a impasse, if you will, on some of this, right? Where I think some of the volatility in the markets, some of the volatility around capacity enforcement, the eligibility of non-domiciled CDLs, I think those were all tailwinds to the spot market to keep it more kind of foamy and all of that. I think an unwelcome headwind has been fuel, and it's one that I hope. The unfortunate thing about fuel is that a quick recession in high fuel prices can actually be a double whammy for carriers. Carriers that weren't able to negotiate up the full amount of their pump price fuel increase. If fuel prices come down quite quickly, they could actually see revenues erode even further, right? Because then shippers or brokers are like, well, hey, fuel's down. You told me last week you needed more because fuel was up. I'm not going to pay you more right now. So that can be just very troublesome.
So as we get closer to wrapping up for today, I'd like to kind of leave it with each of you guys to kind of help me understand. My feeling right now is I don't want to panic. I don't think that's reasonable. But there's these other things that seem, do we have a big recession coming? Do we have more nuclear proliferation? Do we see more advantageous conflict? Maybe we'll go and take Cuba. It'd be a nice little thing to pick up, as the president said. So I'll start with you, Jason. Should I panic?
No, there's no reason to panic yet. We're just, again, we're in the type of volatility right now I felt like we were at in the initial stages of the pandemic when we just didn't know what was going on. It feels almost a lot right now. March of 2026 is feeling a lot like March of 2020 when we just didn't know what was going on there. It's something about March, because that when March of 2022 was the last big spike of energy prices after Russia had invaded Ukraine at the end of February of that year. And so I think that for me, it's, it's kind of trying to step back and say, okay, $4 a gallon gas, that doesn't cause a recession in the United States. $5 a gallon gas, I think that gets us because of how consumers are strained a little bit closer to the borderline. If we go to 6 or 7, then that's the point you probably have to assume, okay, there's going to be a true slowdown of activity because the Fed's going to be raising rates at the same time. I think if you're a carrier out there is recognizing, okay, probably 2026 is not going to be the year of consumer spending on appliances and things like that. So if you're hauling that type of freight, I wouldn't be expecting much growth. Data centers, anything associated with that is just doing, again, phenomenal right now at the moment. And so I think that that's where, it's recognizing that different shipper verticals are going to fare very differently. And then recognizing what type of shipper verticals are most sensitive to energy, price situations. And to me, what I'm just taking away right now is the U.S. consumer is going to be more strained in 2026 than what we anticipated. As long as the ultra wealthy keep spending, it'll probably keep the economy out of a recession. But you may not see that single family housing market recover like we were really hoping it would this year. I think it's very difficult right now to get excited for where single family housing is going to be at in 2026 versus if we were having this conversation a month ago.
Yeah, and single family housing is so important for the transportation industry. I think it's like 7 full truckloads go into every house that's built. So when you build a house, there's a lot of freight that gets moving. So turning to you, Ken, clearly Professor Miller is of the opinion that I ought not to panic. Do you share that sentiment, or do you think maybe I should panic, just not a ton?
I would only panic if you are a broker who submitted a bid to a large shipper based on 2024 pricing. Then you should definitely be panicking. You should be packing boxes and you should be downloading your contacts to take with you in your next job. But no, I don't think panicking is ever a good solution. I think I was pretty confident this was going to be like the 13 to 17 market prior to the oil thing. Like that was what I don't gamble. But I would have probably placed a nominal wager on that to be the shape of this market. And now I don't know. I think we had some weather. I know I lived through it, so the folks who said we didn't have weather challenges in the Northeast and Midwest in February are factually incorrect, because I lived through Winter Storm Fern. It was not pleasant. I lived through the subsequent polar vortex. It definitely had an effect on the freight markets. So I think a lot of shippers that I talk to, they want to see a little bit of tape on what this market looks like absent disruption. And so that, I think, is probably the most measured way to look at it. It's a tough time to price. I don't think anyone's going to argue that, especially if you're a broker. But even if you're an asset-based carrier, it's a tough time to price because you just don't know where the market's probably going to head.
Maybe this is why we have more transparency. We'll just have everyone know every cost all the time. It'll be the perfect solution, right, Ken?
I don't think so. Maybe we could all get higher frequency data. That might be the one solution to this problem.
Well, I think I'll have to have you guys back again in the near future as we kind of navigate this new crisis and presumably the next new crisis that we'll see materialize in the weeks and months ahead. But thank you for joining us. I appreciate you. For folks who want to follow you, I know LinkedIn is great, but where else can people find you? Start with you, Professor Miller, and then we'll go to my good buddy, Ken.
Yeah, so best place is LinkedIn to find me, or just throw my name and Michigan State into Google, and I should be the first thing that comes up.
This is a great time for March Madness. I mean, this is truly madness.
Yeah, and again, I don't know what it is about this month, man. I'm getting tired of it. The Ides of March.
Julius Caesar was worried about it. He warned us. He told us.
You beat my Ides of March joke that I was sitting here on mute with when you guys were talking about March. Yeah, I'm the Freight Nerd at the Freight Nerd on X. There's a little bit more short form content. I kind of set a New Year's resolution to post at least one thought piece or something related to that on LinkedIn a week. So I'm over there as well.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. And again, we're going to reshare this stream now it's not buffering on LinkedIn. So now people on LinkedIn can see this. We'll reload it. It's the nature of technology. Thank you, as always, for joining us, gentlemen. Ken Adamo, Chief of Analytics, General Manager for Shipper at DAT, Dial a Truck, and Professor Jason Miller, Endowed Professor at the Eli Broad College of Business. Go green, my friend.
Go white.
And that is today's program. I'm sorry about the technical issues. This is the problem when you do these things. You hope it all works. I'm just a simple country lawyer. I am not a media conglomerate. Maybe someday we'll get there. Thank you for joining us for Should I Panic? Presumably we shouldn't, but who knows? The feed stopped working halfway through, so maybe we should have. It's all good. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us. The Armchair Attorney Podcast. We will catch you at a later date and time. As always, thanks to my friends at DAT and Genlogs for helping make this thing possible. We'll see you next time on the Armchair Attorney Podcast.